Hello there. Have you ever wondered why, despite doing everything you possibly can, the results don't always turn out the way you expect? I'm sure you've tried countless weight loss methods, exercised endlessly, and even changed your diet, yet it feels like your efforts are still falling short of your goal. Well, it might be that you haven't fully understood the psychological tricks that your own brain is using to sabotage your progress. Over the next 2 hours, I'm going to share with you some surprisingly effective psychological techniques that could forever change the way you think about weight loss. Let me take you on a journey to discover the mysteries within yourself. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the Smart Sleep channel so you won't miss out on other helpful videos. Let's begin this journey right now, shall we? The Dunning-Kruger effect is one of those fascinating yet surprising psychological phenomena. You might be surprised to learn that sometimes a person's confidence has little to do with their actual ability. In reality, there are people we might call incompetent, who seem incredibly confident about what they know. On the other hand, those who are truly skilled and have deep knowledge in a particular field often doubt themselves, even tending to underestimate their abilities. If you've ever felt insecure standing before a crowd, or perhaps you've encountered someone who seemed very confident about something you knew they didn't fully understand, that's when you're witnessing the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. This effect doesn't just happen in one specific area. It shows up in many aspects of life. Think about the times you've participated in discussions where those who know the least about a topic tend to be the ones talking the most, the loudest, almost as if they were experts in the field. Meanwhile, the people who actually have solid knowledge often don't feel comfortable expressing their views. They aren't sure of what they know and always fear being found out for not knowing everything. This leads them to feel insecure, and at times, they miss opportunities to share their insights with others. So, why does this happen? The truth is, the Dunning-Kruger effect arises from a lack of understanding about our own limitations. People who lack competence in a certain area, not recognizing the extent of their knowledge, tend to believe they know more than they actually do. They're unable to perceive the gaps in their understanding, which is why they're overly confident. On the other hand, highly knowledgeable individuals can clearly recognize the complexity of an issue, as well as the things they don't know. This humility often prevents them from being complacent, and sometimes they feel they're not good enough, even though, in reality, they possess far superior abilities. Imagine this. When we start learning about something, especially when we're beginners, everything seems simple. You easily grasp basic principles and think you understand everything. But the deeper you dive, the more you realize just how much you don't know. At this point, you might begin to feel that you're not good enough, not capable of grasping the full complexity of the topic. This happens because the more you understand about a field, the more you become aware of what you still don't know. But those who have only scratched the surface tend to believe they've learned it all, overestimating their abilities and feeling confident about what they know. And it's this overconfidence that can lead to unwanted consequences. When we feel confident about something we don't fully understand, we might make poor decisions, give inaccurate opinions, or even make others believe in falsehoods. This doesn't only affect us. It can also have a negative impact on those around us, because our display of ignorance can cause harm to society. This is especially dangerous in fields that require deep knowledge, like science, medicine, technology, or politics, where a person with little knowledge but excessive confidence can make decisions that affect many others. Meanwhile, those who truly understand a subject often don't exhibit the same level of confidence. They are aware of how much they don't know, and they know that knowledge is always evolving. This self-awareness tends to make them humble. This creates an interesting paradox. The less capable often feel overly confident, while those who are truly capable tend to doubt themselves. It's one of the strange aspects of human psychology, where ignorance can make us feel more confident, and deep understanding can make us feel more insecure about what we know. The Dunning-Kruger effect also explains some of the everyday phenomena we often don't notice. Think about those times when you've been in discussions, either at work or in personal life. Those who know little about an issue often exhibit the most confidence, talk the most, and even try to impose their opinions on others. In contrast, experts tend to listen more, speak less, and think carefully before concluding. This is a clear sign of the Dunning-Kruger effect in real life. The overly confident people don't realize their own ignorance, while the knowledgeable ones stay humble and cautious. This contrast in how people perceive and assess their own abilities creates a major obstacle in personal development. Those with limited knowledge may never realize the gaps in their understanding and therefore don't strive to learn more. On the other hand, those who are truly capable often doubt themselves and tend to limit their potential. To overcome the Dunning-Kruger effect, we need to have a clear awareness of our own limits, acknowledge that we can always learn and improve, and most importantly, stay humble about what we know. If you've ever felt insecure about your abilities in a particular area, or conversely, have felt that people around you are overly confident despite not fully understanding the issue, you're not alone. We all encounter the Dunning-Kruger effect in some form throughout our lives. But what matters is recognizing it so that we don't let overconfidence or a lack of confidence hinder our personal growth. Learn to be humble about what you know and always be open to learning more from others. With an understanding of the Dunning-Kruger effect, we can create a better learning environment where everyone recognizes that the truth is not always simple and knowledge is always changing. Ask yourself, are you overestimating your abilities in a certain area? Or do you feel inadequate simply because you haven't yet realized the complexity of the issue? The answers to these questions may help you break through the limits in your thinking and make great strides in your personal development. Before we move on to our next analysis of the false consensus effect, you may already be starting to understand how psychological factors can influence the way we perceive and evaluate the world around us. These effects can sometimes lead us to make decisions and take actions that are not entirely accurate, without realizing that we are viewing the world through a narrow lens of our own perspective. Now, let's continue exploring another effect that you may find quite familiar in everyday social life, one that we may unknowingly or intentionally overlook. The false consensus effect is one of those fascinating yet harmful psychological phenomena that many of us fall victim to. In today's world, where information spreads at lightning speed and social media has become an inseparable part of our lives, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that what we believe, feel, or trust are the same thoughts shared by the majority around us. This is not just a simple misunderstanding. It can lead to far-reaching consequences, affecting personal relationships and even social or political debates. The implication of this effect is that we fail to recognize that everyone has their own unique perspective and judgment, which doesn't always align with our own views. Perhaps at some point in your life, when debating a particular issue, you felt as though everything you said was right, and if someone disagreed with you, they might be wrong or uninformed. You might even have been surprised, disappointed, or angry when others didn't share the same perspective as you. In reality, this is the most evident display of the false consensus effect. We assume that our thoughts and feelings are widespread and supported by the majority, even though in truth, not everyone thinks the same way. This is a form of self-deception, where we don't realize that just because our views are reinforced in a group of friends or family, it doesn't mean society at large agrees with them. The false consensus effect doesn't just appear in simple debates. It can also lead to serious misunderstandings in larger social issues. Take elections, for example. During major elections, people often tend to think that those around them will vote the same way they do. If not, at least they believe others share similar political values and views. This makes us feel as though we're living in a world where our perspectives are overwhelmingly supported, without recognizing that many others hold entirely different views. We easily ignore or fail to listen to opposing voices, and this is the seed of social division. We often get caught up in the whirlwind of thinking that everyone thinks like we do. And this doesn't only apply to political or social issues, but also to everyday life. In personal relationships, we sometimes expect others to understand and empathize with us in the same way we feel. We assume that our emotions and thoughts are common and easily understood, and if someone doesn't empathize, we may feel confused, disappointed, or even irritated. In reality, each person has their own unique experiences and viewpoints, and these differences are completely natural. Believing that our perspective represents everyone's is a mistake. The false consensus effect can make us less sensitive to differing viewpoints, and this affects not only how we communicate but also blurs our ability to understand and respect others' opinions. Imagine preparing a strong stance on an issue, convinced it will be accepted by everyone. However, when you receive a contrary response, you feel overwhelmed and find it hard to accept the difference. You start to think that others simply don't understand or are deliberately going against your view. The truth is, those people have their own logical reasoning and thoughts. They are not wrong. They just see the world from a different perspective. The challenge with the false consensus effect is that we fail to recognize that we live in a multi-dimensional world where each person carries their own story, educational background, and life perspective. When we approach an issue with the assumption that everyone thinks like I do, we overlook important factors, and at times, this closed-mindedness makes us less aware of the world around us. Realizing that others may have a different perspective not only broadens our view but also helps us understand ourselves better. In relationships, the false consensus effect can lead to unfortunate misunderstandings. You may think that your partner will always agree with your decisions because you believe you've made the right choice. You assume they'll see the issue the same way, but in reality, they might view it entirely differently. This doesn't mean anyone is right or wrong. It simply means we need to accept the differences in how each person thinks and feels. Open, understanding conversations, and respecting differing views are the keys to building healthy and lasting relationships. Sometimes, the false consensus effect shows up in small groups, like among friends or colleagues. We tend to think that the views within the group are correct, and if someone has a different opinion, they might be considered out of place or even excluded from the group. This not only creates communication barriers, but also makes it easier to reject fresh, creative perspectives. We become closed off in our comfort zones, no longer wanting to explore or open up to new ideas. The false consensus effect doesn't always bring negative consequences, but when it dominates our behavior, it can create rifts in relationships and communities. It makes us feel that we are always right and others should think like us, but in reality, a diverse and rich world of viewpoints and feelings always exists beyond our own. To truly grow and understand, we need to step out of our own bubble look at things objectively, and respect differences. Before we continue exploring another psychological phenomenon, do you feel like we often live with the belief that everything in life happens for a reason? The belief in fairness can be very powerful, and sometimes we don't realize that trusting in a fair world can actually cause us to overlook the complexity and pain of reality. Let's explore another fascinating yet paradoxical theory, the just world hypothesis. Throughout life, we're often taught that good people will be rewarded and bad people will be punished. This is a basic and almost instinctive belief, helping us feel safe and giving us a way to make sense of the events in life. It creates a sense that, although the world may not be perfect, it will at least operate according to some principle of fairness. In fact, this belief has helped us navigate many challenges in life, making us feel that every action has a corresponding response, and if we do good, good things will come to us. However, when we look at reality, things aren't always that simple. Not always do good people get what they deserve, and bad people aren't always punished as we might expect. There are good people who still suffer pain, loss, or even mistreatment. On the flip side, there are people who commit bad actions but thrive, find happiness, and seem to face no consequences. These situations make us feel like our belief in a just world is being shaken, and perhaps we are simply living in an illusion. The just world hypothesis suggests that humans have a tendency to believe that the world around them operates according to a fair principle, where everything happens for a reason and every action will receive an appropriate reward or punishment. This is why, when we witness someone struggling, a victim suffering, or an injustice happening, we tend to ask, what did they do wrong to deserve this? We believe that if someone faces hardship, they must have done something wrong or somehow deserved it. And if someone is living in happiness and success, they may have done something right, or at least not be a bad person. Believing in a just world is part of human nature because it helps us feel safe in this world. If everything has a principle, if our actions can create clear and fair outcomes, then we can easily explain events in life and predict the results of our choices. A just world reduces our anxiety and insecurity because we know fairness will always prevail. However, when reality doesn't align with this, we find it difficult to accept, and because of this, we start to form distorted thoughts. One of the consequences of believing in the just world hypothesis is the tendency to blame those facing difficulties in life. When we witness someone in misfortune, we tend to ask, what did they do wrong? Or they may not have been lucky enough to avoid this. This stems from the belief that people only face hardships if they deserve them. We may start to view victims not as individuals harmed by situations beyond their control, but as people who made mistakes, failed to do well, or simply don't deserve good things. This leads to a lack of empathy, discrimination, and sometimes even ostracism towards those who are facing difficulties. We fail to understand that sometimes bad things happen to good people simply due to chance, because of life's ironic nature, and not because they deserve it. Blaming the victim, instead of helping them overcome their challenges, only increases division and suffering. Those who are hurting may feel abandoned, condemned, and even have their pain ignored. This is not only unjust but also inhumane. We also see the effects of the just world hypothesis in social and political issues. In many societies, people may believe that the poor, the powerless, or those without wealth are somehow deserving of their plight. We assume that if they worked harder or had stronger willpower, they would be able to change their destiny. But the truth is, there are people who, even after working tirelessly and giving their best efforts, still cannot escape poverty or find opportunities to change their lives. Therefore, believing in a just world can sometimes lead to contempt for those facing injustice, because we believe they simply don't have the strength to overcome those challenges. The just world hypothesis can also lead to discrimination in personal relationships. We tend to blame others for the troubles they face, or try to explain their failures by saying they didn't do well enough, weren't deserving, or weren't lucky enough. Instead of offering help and understanding, we may inadvertently make them feel isolated, abandoned, and unsupported. This increases isolation and division among different groups in society. However, it is crucial for us to recognize that the world is not always fair. Life does not always unfold the way we expect or imagine. Not always do good people get rewarded, and not always do bad people face punishment. The world is full of randomness, injustice, and things that cannot be explained. When we come to terms with this, we will no longer feel the need to blame those facing hardships, and we will not deceive ourselves about the fairness of the world. Instead, we will be able to open our hearts, understand better, and become people friends, colleagues, and citizens who help others in difficulty without judgment. When we let go of blind faith in absolute fairness, we can face this world in a more realistic and humane way. Before we continue exploring another interesting psychological phenomenon that we may encounter in everyday life, you may have started to realize that our thoughts, beliefs, and emotions deeply influence our physical well-being and health. Today, we will delve into one of the most fascinating phenomena in psychology, the placebo and nocebo effects. The placebo and nocebo effects sound unfamiliar, but in reality, these effects are always around us, whether we recognize them or not. You've probably heard of a miraculous drug, a treatment method that can help reduce pain or even cure illness. The miracle here is not the drug or method itself, but your belief in its effectiveness. The placebo effect is a powerful testament to how belief and thoughts can change our feelings and even our health. Sometimes, simply believing that something will work is enough for our bodies to truly experience improvement. Even if the method itself has no actual effect, imagine a simple scenario. When you have a headache, someone gives you a pill and says it will relieve the pain instantly. You believe them, and soon you notice that the headache seems to lessen or even disappear entirely. But if you look closely, that pill may just be a harmless sugar pill with no medicinal properties to reduce the pain. So why do you feel better? This is the power of the placebo effect. When your belief in a treatment, even a fake one, helps your body perceive an improvement. This shows that our health is not only dependent on medication or physical methods, but also heavily influenced by our psychology and mindset. The placebo effect doesn't just appear in medical research, but can also be seen in everyday life. You've probably heard someone say they felt better after drinking a type of tea or taking a vitamin, even though there's nothing special in those products. They simply believe that they will work, and this belief makes them feel better, even though their body hasn't actually changed. Our bodies respond strongly to belief. When we believe we will get better, our bodies start to change to reflect that belief. And this is a remarkable psychological phenomenon. However, the placebo effect is only one side of the coin. The other side, the nocebo effect, is when our negative beliefs can harm our bodies. If you've ever heard of someone feeling tired, sore, or even ill simply because they think they will get sick, that's an example of the nocebo effect. When we believe that something will harm us, our body can truly experience those symptoms, even though nothing is actually happening. Our body, like a machine, can react strongly to thoughts and emotions, even when we're not really facing any issues. For example, if a person is told by a doctor that they may experience side effects from a particular medication, even if those side effects have never occurred with that drug before, they may experience symptoms like fatigue, dizziness, or stomach pain. The medication may not cause any side effects, but because the person believes what the doctor said, they may feel those symptoms. Their body has created these symptoms purely from negative belief, and the anxiety and fear lead to unwanted reactions. The nocebo effect shows how powerful our psychology can be in influencing our health. When we worry, fear, or imagine bad things happening, our bodies react as though those things are actually happening. That's why many people suffer from stress-related illnesses, anxiety, or negative health feelings. They believe they will get sick, and this belief manifests into real symptoms, even though nothing bad is happening. One important takeaway from both of these effects is that health doesn't only depend on physical factors, but also on the combination of our psychology and emotions. This is not only related to taking medicine or treating illnesses, but also to how we think about our health. When we have positive beliefs, we feel healthier, even if nothing physically changes. On the other hand, when we have negative beliefs, we may harm ourselves without even realizing it. Belief is a crucial factor that influences not only how we perceive the world, but also how our bodies respond to that world. The placebo and nocebo effects can apply to many aspects of life. You may see people participating in medical trials or receiving treatment for minor pain, feeling better simply because they believe in the treatment, even if it has no effect. Studies also show that people who believe in their ability to recover, or those with a positive outlook on health, tend to recover faster than those who do not. When we feel confident about our health, our bodies actually respond and heal more quickly, proving the power of psychology in maintaining and improving health. Similarly, the nocebo effect can be seen in everyday life, especially when we face worries or fears about our health. If we think we will get sick or experience severe symptoms, our bodies may react and develop those symptoms, even though nothing is actually happening. The pain and discomfort we feel may stem solely from our thoughts and anxieties. From these two effects, we can see that the combination of psychology and physical health is a miracle that science is gradually uncovering. Research on the placebo and nocebo effects opens a new door to understanding the relationship between the mind and health. We are not just physical bodies. We are also emotional and spiritual beings, where health truly begins with our thoughts and beliefs. Therefore, if you want to be healthy, it's not just about taking care of your body. You also need to take care of your mental state, nurture positive thoughts, and hold a strong belief in your body's ability to heal itself. When you change your thoughts, you are also changing your body in ways you never imagined. Before we continue to explore another aspect of psychology, have you ever noticed that sometimes, when looking back at past events, it feels like you already knew exactly how everything would turn out? In fact, this is one of the most fascinating yet paradoxical phenomena in how we perceive the past, a phenomenon that psychologists call the hindsight effect. Let's explore and reflect on this effect together, as it not only impacts our perception but can also change the way we evaluate the decisions and actions in our lives. The hindsight effect, or the "I knew it all along" effect, is an interesting psychological phenomenon that occurs when we look back at an event from the past and feel like we knew the outcome beforehand. Sometimes, we even feel that if we had known what was going to happen, we could have predicted everything from the start. While this may seem harmless and even a way for us to make sense of what has happened, It can lead to undesirable consequences in how we judge the past, especially in relation to important decisions. Imagine a situation in your life, perhaps a major decision you once made. For example, you decided to invest in a company. After a period, the company faces difficulties and you lose part of your assets. In that moment, you might feel disappointed and regretful, but after reflecting on it, you start thinking, I should have known this would happen, or all the signs pointed to this company struggling. And that is the hindsight effect, when you feel like you knew the outcome, even though at the time you couldn't have predicted what would happen. This effect can arise in various situations in life. It could happen in a sports match when your team loses, and you start thinking that you had seen the signs of failure from the start. Or in a relationship, you think that the issues you encountered were obvious from the beginning, and you should have realized sooner that things weren't going to work out. In reality, we can never know all the factors that could influence the final outcome from the very beginning. That's why the hindsight effect can make us misjudge what happened and even diminish our understanding of the decision-making process we went through at the time. The complacency that the hindsight effect brings is an important factor to be aware of. When you think you knew the outcome, you easily become overconfident in your ability to predict and make decisions. This can make you overlook unpredictable factors or random fluctuations that you couldn't control. In life, not everything can be predicted accurately. It is these unexpected factors, the changes we cannot foresee, that make life interesting and essential. But when we fall into the hindsight effect, we easily forget that, in reality, every decision is based on uncertain factors, and we cannot predict every situation. So why does the hindsight effect occur? Simply because humans have a natural instinct to seek meaning and logic in every event. When something happens, we tend to connect events together, creating a coherent and understandable story. This helps us feel in control of the world around us. When an event is over, we start thinking back on the signs, choices, and actions that led to the result, and feel that we could have predicted everything. However, the truth is, we are looking at the event through the lens of the past, with all the information that we have now, not when we were making those decisions, when everything was unclear. One serious issue the hindsight effect can cause is the misjudgment of the decision-making process. When we look back at a decision from the past, especially a wrong decision, we may easily criticize ourselves and feel like we made a huge mistake. However, if we look at that situation from the perspective we had at the time, with the information available, we would realize that every decision had a reason behind it and might not have been wrong at that time. When we fall into the hindsight effect, we tend to judge the past using information that only exists in the present, which leads to overly harsh and unfair evaluations. We can clearly see the impact of the hindsight effect in work, personal relationships, and financial decisions. In work, when a project fails, people often look back and think, I should have done it differently. However, at the time of the decision, no one could have predicted all the factors that could have influenced the outcome. In personal relationships, when a relationship ends, we often ask ourselves, why didn't I realize sooner that this relationship wouldn't last? But looking back, we forget that at that time, all the signs were unclear, and the small things we thought were harmless ended up being important factors that led to the final outcome. The hindsight effect can also increase feelings of disappointment and regret when we think about past decisions. We may feel that we could have done better, or if we had known what would happen, we could have changed our actions. But what's important is to recognize that, in reality, we made decisions based on what we knew at the time, with limited information, and in a situation full of uncertainty. Therefore, the hindsight effect is not just a fascinating psychological phenomenon, but also an important lesson that teaches us how to face the past without regret or self-blame. This effect can also lead to a loss of self-confidence when we overestimate our ability to predict the future. When we look back at past events and think we knew the outcome, we may become overly confident in our predictive abilities. This can lead to risky decisions because we'll feel like we can always predict the outcome accurately. However, in reality, the world is full of uncontrollable factors, and we can't be certain about the results in unforeseen situations. Thus, the best way to deal with the hindsight effect is to be aware of it. We need to learn how to view the past with humility and understanding that every decision had its reason at the time, and we couldn't foresee all the factors that could influence the outcome. What's important is not to let the past cloud our decision-making abilities for the future, but instead to learn from our mistakes and experiences to become more decisive, realistic, and cautious in future situations. Before we dive into another fascinating psychological phenomenon, you may have already started to notice something interesting about how humans evaluate the things around them. Sometimes, the things we create ourselves, even though they may not be perfect as we expected, hold a special value and meaning to us. This is not just about products we create in our work or lives, but also reflects an intriguing psychological phenomenon called the IKEA effect. Let's explore this phenomenon, as it can help us understand more about ourselves and how we perceive the things around us. The IKEA effect, one of the most unique psychological phenomena, shows that people tend to value things they create themselves, even if those products are not necessarily better than those made by others. You may have experienced this feeling when assembling a piece of furniture yourself, like a table or a chair from IKEA. Although that piece of furniture may not be the most beautiful or the sturdiest, when you look at it, that's the power of the IKEA effect, a psychological phenomenon that makes us feel that the products we create have more value simply because we put effort into making them. Think about something you assembled with your own hands in the past. It could be a bookshelf, a nightstand, or any other item that you created yourself. You may recall the moment when you looked at the finished product. Even though it wasn't the most beautiful or perfect item, you likely felt a special sense of pride. You might think that, despite the bookshelf not being perfect, it was made by you, with your effort and time. The connection you feel and the pride in the job well done make you rate that object much higher than it may actually deserve. The IKEA effect helps us understand that the emotional attachment to what we create can influence how we value it. When we assemble something ourselves, whether it's a table or a chair, we're not just creating a physical object, but also forging a connection with it. The effort and work we invest in completing a task increase the value of the product in our eyes. The item becomes more than just a tool or object. It becomes part of the creative process, a part of ourselves. The emotional and physical investment makes that object an inseparable part of our identity. This explains why we often value self-made items or DIY projects more highly than those created by others. Sure, the table you assembled might not be the best product in the store, but because you've invested your time and energy into it, you view it with love and pride. You see every detail, every step you took, and this feeling creates a special bond between you and the item. That's why you feel the table deserves more appreciation. because it's not just a physical product, it's a testament to your effort and persistence. This emotional attachment can also affect how we assess other things in life. Imagine making a gift for someone. It might not be technically perfect or of high quality, but when you give it to them, you feel like it's the most valuable gift. The gift isn't just about what you bought, but about what you put into it. Love, effort, and time. When you see the recipient appreciating the gift, the joy and happiness you feel come not only from the significance of the gift, but also from the fact that you created it, making the other person feel special. This is why we tend to value things we make ourselves more than they might be worth. DIY items are often cherished and cared for, even if they are not perfect. Unlike industrial products made by professionals with modern technology, in reality, the IKEA effect applies not only to physical products, but also to any project we complete ourselves, from learning a new skill to building a relationship or even creating a piece of art. The satisfaction we feel when we look at our own achievements is an essential part of our personal growth. Thus, the IKEA effect doesn't just reflect how we value things we make, but also serves as a reminder of self-confidence and pride in our creations. Sometimes, society may judge a product by objective standards, but the feeling we get when we make something ourselves provides an intangible value, emotional worth that can't be measured by numbers or technical criteria. That's why we feel proud of what we create, even if others might not value it as highly as we do. It's a part of self-expression, of proving ourselves through what we've made, big or small. The IKEA effect can also be seen as part of the quest for fulfillment and self-realization in life. We all want to feel that we can create something, whether it's a product, a work of art, or a relationship. Making something, even if it's just a table or a chair, is how we demonstrate our creativity and strength. Every time we complete a DIY project, no matter how simple or complex, we feel stronger, more confident, and sometimes even a little proud of ourselves. Of course, the IKEA effect doesn't always have positive outcomes. When we focus too much on making everything ourselves, we may become stubborn and refuse to accept products or ideas from others because we've grown too attached to what we've created. This can hinder our personal growth and limit our perspectives. However, if we recognize the emotional attachment and pride in our creations, while maintaining an open attitude, we can learn from the experiences and products of others, while also properly appreciating the value of what we create. Thus, the IKEA effect is not just a phenomenon about the material value we attach to what we make, but also a part of our journey towards self-expression and self-affirmation. When we look at what we've made and feel proud, we realize the value of creativity, effort, and faith in our abilities. Whether the product is perfect or not, the most important thing is the feeling we get from the process of creating it. That's the value the IKEA effect provides: pride and emotional connection, helping us feel that everything we make holds a special significance. Before we move on to the next part of our journey exploring fascinating psychological phenomena, have you ever noticed that the elements around us, sometimes small and familiar, can deeply influence our behavior and emotions without us even realizing it? Words, images, and even small life experiences can guide us and change our decisions without us being aware of it. One of the fascinating psychological phenomena related to this influence is the priming effect. The priming effect is one of the most profound psychological phenomena that we may have never paid attention to in everyday life. Even though it is always present and strongly affects the way we think and act, this effect can be simply understood as the unconscious influence of factors like words, images, or previous experiences on our behavior and decisions later on. These factors, though small and invisible, can lead us to make decisions or take actions that we are unaware of. In fact, the priming effect can subtly and profoundly shape the choices we make in life. You've likely noticed yourself changing behavior for no clear reason. For example, when you walk into a store and hear soft background music, the relaxing feeling it gives you might make you feel more comfortable and likely to spend more, even if you had no intention of shopping excessively. Even just a gentle, soothing piece of music can cause a significant shift in your spending habits. This is a prime example of the priming effect. When you are exposed to an unexpected factor like music, a sensation, or a word, you'll feel it influencing your thoughts and actions. Even though you don't realize you're being affected, the priming effect doesn't stop at spending more when you hear music. Another example could be when you walk into a space decorated with bright, vibrant colors. You may feel energized and excited, ready to engage in sports or social activities. On the other hand, if you enter a space with dark, muted colors, you might feel relaxed, peaceful, and even not want to do much. That's how the elements around you can adjust your feelings and behavior without you being aware of it. How the priming effect works is simple, but has a deep impact on our daily lives. Psychological studies have shown that the smallest influencing factors, like a word or a familiar image, can change the way we perceive a problem or make a decision. For example, when you read words like success, growth, you might feel a strong motivation to continue working or taking action. This feeling, even though it doesn't come entirely from you, helps you decide to keep working because you unconsciously associate those words with positive outcomes and prosperity. The priming effect can be even stronger when we are exposed to images that evoke strong emotions. The image of a happy person can make us feel cheerful and inspire us to do good things. Meanwhile, the image of someone in distress or sadness can make us feel anxious, uneasy, and uncomfortable. These effects, even though we don't consciously recognize them, strongly influence our behavior throughout the day. That's why ads on television or marketing campaigns often use emotional words or images to create unconscious reactions from viewers. When we see an image of a happy family using a product, we naturally think that the product will bring happiness to us, even though in reality, it cannot provide happiness that simply. These small factors can lead to significant changes in our behavior that we don't even realize. We might decide to buy something we don't need, just because we feel relaxed and comfortable due to soft music or a vibrant, creative decor. Even simple ads can create unconscious influence, causing us to buy a product because we feel it will bring us the positive feelings we're seeking. Of course, the priming effect doesn't only influence shopping behavior, it can also apply to many other aspects of life. For example, when you participate in a conversation and the other person uses positive words, you might find the conversation easier and more enjoyable. Words like success, progress, or happiness evoke positive feelings, making you open up and share more. Conversely, if you encounter a conversation with negative words, such as difficulties, problems, you may feel uncomfortable and even avoid the conversation. The priming effect also affects decisions at work. You've likely seen yourself change decisions based on an unconscious situation you couldn't control. If you have to choose between two jobs, you might be influenced by surrounding factors like how you perceive the work environment, how your colleagues or former boss talk about the company, or even past feelings you had about that job. These factors can create a logical feeling and lead you to make a decision based on subtle, unclear external influences. The priming effect is not always easy to recognize, but it can change how we think and act in situations we consider simple. Therefore, becoming aware of these unconscious influencing factors can help us control our behavior better and avoid making decisions based solely on external influences. When you start to realize you're being affected by unconscious factors, you can learn to manage your emotions and behaviors and make more informed, thoughtful decisions. So, what makes the priming effect so powerful? It's the power of the human mind, the influence of invisible factors we aren't even aware of. When we get caught up in emotions, words, images, or music without realizing that they are changing our behavior, we can easily fall into the trap of making poor decisions. But if we learn to be aware of this effect, we can take control of our lives and behaviors and not let unconscious factors lead us down unwanted paths. Therefore, the priming effect is not just a fascinating psychological phenomenon, but also a tool for us to better understand ourselves. It shows us that our minds don't always work consciously, and sometimes external factors can influence our behavior without us even knowing it. When we become aware of the power of these unconscious factors, we can use them wisely to create positive outcomes and benefit our lives. Before we continue with another intriguing psychological phenomenon, you may have already begun to realize that the way we remember our life experiences doesn't always reflect the reality of the entire experience. Sometimes, we only remember a specific moment, a strong feeling we had, and sometimes, the way we remember it can be very different from the reality. One of the psychological phenomena related to how we remember experiences is the peak end effect. The peak end effect is one of the most interesting psychological phenomena we can encounter in daily life. This concept explains how humans tend to remember events and experiences primarily based on two factors: the peak moment, the most intense emotion, and how it ends. This means that when we recall a long event, we often only remember the peak moments, the strongest emotions, and how the event ended, rather than the entire experience we went through. A lengthy experience might include many details, but when we look back, the strong feelings from the peak moments or the ending occupy our memories, and we might overlook the parts in between, which may have been uneventful. You've probably had an experience like this. Think about a long holiday you had. Maybe the whole trip was filled with interesting moments, like visiting new places, tasting delicious food, meeting new people, or even having meaningful conversations. But when you look back on the holiday, you might only remember a specific moment, perhaps a breathtaking sunset you witnessed, or a joyful laughter shared at a party. That's the peak end effect, where our memory doesn't retain the whole experience but focuses on the peak moments and how the event ended. This doesn't only happen with trips or vacations, but can appear in many other experiences in life. For example, in a long movie, you may remember the most intense scene, the thrilling moment when the plot reaches its climax, or the emotional final scene that you can't forget. The scenes in between might not have been the most remarkable, but what you remember most is the drama of the climax, or the emotional feeling in the final moments of the film. Similarly, at a party, you might remember the happiest moments, meaningful conversations, or a surprising moment, but the parts of the party that lasted longer might not leave as strong an impression. The peak end effect shows us that human memory is easily influenced by extreme emotions and the ending of an event, rather than the entire process. An experience, no matter how long or detailed, will be strongly shaped by the peak moments, the strongest emotions we felt throughout it. If you attend a lengthy event, even if there are many interesting and memorable parts, you might only remember the moments when you felt the happiest or the times when you felt you achieved something special. This explains why we might feel that a wonderful experience throughout its duration didn't leave a strong impression once it ended, even though we had memorable moments along the way. Conversely, if the experience ends poorly, maybe in an unfulfilling way or with a feeling of disappointment, we'll feel like the whole event wasn't worth it, even though great moments took place earlier. The peak end effect also explains why, in many cases, an event or experience can be remembered inaccurately. Sometimes, we may feel that a long event was truly amazing just because the ending was perfect. Perhaps, during the event, there were some dull or uneventful moments. But if it ended wonderfully, that feeling would overshadow the rest of the event in our minds. We would remember the ending as the best part and forget the less remarkable parts. This can also be seen in everyday experiences, particularly in relationships. In a long relationship, the ups and downs may dominate what we remember. If the relationship ends peacefully and on a sweet note, we may remember it as a beautiful one. However, if it ends in pain, the ending will make the entire relationship seem negative, even though there may have been many lovely and memorable moments during the time you were together. One interesting application of the peak end effect is in improving customer experiences. Managers and businesses often use this principle to make the customer experience better. For example, in customer service, if you end a conversation with a customer in a warm and sincere way, they'll feel more satisfied, even if most of the conversation was focused on trivial issues. This proves that how an experience ends is just as important as the process itself. The peak end effect also provides valuable insight into how we can create memorable experiences for ourselves and others. If you want an event or experience to be remembered, you not only need to pay attention to the details during the event, but also create memorable peak moments and an emotional ending. When this happens, the entire experience will be engraved in memory, and you'll remember it as part of your most beautiful memories in life. Finally, the peak end effect is not just a psychological phenomenon, but also a reminder of how we perceive and remember life's experiences. Sometimes, the peak moments and endings can strongly influence how we feel and evaluate what we've gone through. Therefore, when you face an experience, whether long or short, remember that the ending and strong emotions will always be what you remember the most. And in those moments, you'll find the strength to create beautiful and unforgettable memories. Before we explore another fascinating psychological phenomenon, you may have noticed that sometimes the experiences in our lives are not fully remembered, but only special moments or strong feelings. And that's when the peak end effect comes into play, helping us explain why the peak moments and endings of an experience can dominate our memory and emotions like this. The peak end effect, a well-known concept in psychology, shows that humans often remember experiences based on two main factors: the peak moments, the most intense emotions in the process, and how the event or experience ends. In reality, the parts in between, even though they might be long and diverse, don't leave as strong an impression on our memory. This explains why, even though there are events or experiences that last a long time, we only remember the special moments or the most intense feelings, or simply the end of that experience. These factors create deep impressions in our minds, making us feel like we've relived those moments many times, even though they may just be a small part of the entire event. Imagine a long holiday you had. You may have visited many beautiful places, enjoyed exciting activities, met new friends, and had happy moments with family. However, when you look back on that holiday, you might only remember a few special moments, like when you sat and watched a stunning sunset, or laughed joyfully with friends during an evening gathering. Although you had many rich experiences during the holiday, it's only those peak moments, or the feelings you had at the end of the trip that remain most deeply in your mind. That's the peak end effect. This effect explains why, during long events or experiences, the middle parts, which might be regular or uneventful, don't leave as strong an impression as the peak moments or the emotional ending. In fact, psychological research shows that when evaluating an experience, our brains select the peak moments, the strongest emotions we felt during the process. And this applies not only to long holidays or vacations, but to many other events in life. From meetings with friends, parties, competitions, sports events, and even personal relationships. You may have attended a long party or event where you met many people, participated in activities, had fun conversations, and enjoyed meals. However, when it's over and you look back, the most exciting moments you remember could be those peak moments, like when you and your friends sang an energetic song, or when you received a surprising gift. The parts in between, whether they were casual conversations or quiet moments, might fade from your memory. So why does this happen? The explanation lies in the peak end effect, where the strong emotions and the final moments leave the deepest impression. This also explains why sometimes an event, even with many exciting moments, might be perceived very differently based on how it ended. Imagine a sports match where your favorite team plays excellently throughout but loses in the final moments. Even though the entire match was tense and had many beautiful moments, the disappointment of the ending will dominate your memory. Conversely, if the match ended with a glorious win, you might forget all the smaller details and only remember that wonderful feeling of victory. The ending of an event can decide how we perceive the entire event, even though the experience may have lasted a long time. The peak end effect not only affects how we remember events in life, but also strongly influences the decisions we make afterward. When evaluating an experience, we tend to assess it based on the emotions we had at the peak and the ending. This can lead us to make biased decisions, as we focus only on the strong emotions in a certain moment and forget about other factors throughout the experience. Therefore, this effect can cause us to exaggerate positive or negative emotions and affect our fair evaluation of an event. In relationships, the peak end effect can also explain why we sometimes remember past relationships not for the entire process, but primarily because of special moments and how they ended. Perhaps you've been in a long relationship with many joys and challenges, but when the relationship ends, the strong feelings at the end, whether it's a sad breakup or a sweet ending, might overshadow everything else. Those strong emotions make you look back at that relationship differently, even though there were many loving and memorable moments during the time you were together. The peak end effect is not just a psychological phenomenon affecting personal experiences, but is also applied in marketing, advertising, and customer service strategies. Companies and businesses have realized that creating positive peak moments and impactful endings in a customer experience can enhance customer satisfaction and loyalty. A customer service experience should not only resolve the customer's issues throughout the process, but also ensure that the end of that experience leaves the customer feeling completely satisfied. This can be applied in any industry, from restaurants and hotels to consumer products, where the customer's feeling about the experience largely depends on how the process ends. A typical example could be a healthcare appointment. You might not remember each step in the treatment or care process, but if you felt comfortable and satisfied during the treatment and ended with a feeling of calm and relaxation, you'll remember that experience as wonderful. But on the contrary, if the appointment ends unsatisfactorily, you'll only remember the disappointment, even if the process was well conducted. The peak end effect is truly a profound lesson on how we remember life experiences. Sometimes, we focus too much on the feelings at the peak moments and the ending, forgetting that the ordinary moments throughout the experience are equally important. However, understanding this effect can help us create memorable and impactful experiences and learn how to view and evaluate what we've gone through more comprehensively. When we become aware of how this effect influences our memory and emotions, we can improve the way we experience and make decisions, creating beautiful and memorable endings for all the events in our lives.